everyone who's joined us today. Much appreciated. We've got the pleasure of having three amazing speakers today. So thank you so much, John, Fernando and Jack. Really appreciate your time. Much appreciated. It's a very much hot topic debate that everyone's talking about at the moment. So we're going to have a little round table. We're going to throw a few questions at these guys and they'll give their opinion. And at the end of it, we'll do a bit of a Q&A session if anyone's got any questions they want to ask. I myself, Matthew, I'm one of the co-founders of Coltech Global. We specialize in hiring hyper-growth companies. In the last 15 years, I've seen recruitment and staffing go up and down. And I have to say, the last 6 to 12 months have probably been the most brutal market, not just for hiring, but when I speak to some of my clients, every other week now, it seems someone's resigning. So it seems every time they hire someone, they take a better step. So it'd be really good to get your guys' insights and your views on it, and it'd be good to see if you have different views and how you perceive the market going. So start off with John. Do you want to give a little 2-minute intro of yourself and your background and where you're from? Then we'll go Fernando, then we'll go Jack.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is John Collins. I'm a director of engineering at Vinted. Prior to joining Vinted, I worked at Microsoft on the Xbox hardware development team. I worked at Apple as a program manager on the iPhone battery team. And I worked at Snapchat and at Flixbus in different capacities in different leadership roles. I lived in Berlin for about 4 years now, and I've been heavily involved with hiring and growth in different terms of different kind of stages of company growth, everything from earlier stage startups to hyper growth. And so the topic of is definitely relevant to my industry and the challenges that we're facing. So thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. So I'm Fernando. Sorry?
I was just saying thanks, John. Sorry, carry on, Fernando.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Fernando, Associate Director of Engineering here at HelloFresh. I'm started in tech more than 20 years ago as a Java developer. Then I moved into a systems architect position, working as a consultant in different companies. Then I joined IBM as a systems architect, and then moved into a solutions project manager position. Stayed there for quite some time. Then I moved to Farfetch in Portugal, lived there for a while. And for 3.5 years, I'm here in Berlin working for HelloFresh in different capacities.
Share that. Cheers, Fernando. And yourself, Jack?
Cool. Yeah, so some people have seen it and called it out. My name is actually 𝐂𝐤𝐥𝐬𝐸, but I lived in Australia for 30 years and people can't cope with that. They don't have the letter, they can't do the pronunciation. So I started calling myself Jack when I was about 10, long time ago. So I did 5 years down there in IBM after my studies and moved to Berlin for 1 year to work and travel around Europe, wait tables and stuff. That project has overrun slightly. I've been here now for 17 years. It's gotten a couple of additional features, 2 kids and a mortgage and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm well ingrained in Berlin by now. And I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Doctorly, but I'm responsible in my role for all the technical stuff. So developers, DevOps, architecture, infrastructure, anything with technology strapped to the back of it's my neck of the woods. Obviously also very involved in the hiring and team growth and things like this at Doctorly, where we're building software for doctors and trying to let people live, or trying to enable people to live a healthier life. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. So the big debate at the moment is, the Great Resignation and how it's affecting companies. Like we do the US market as well as Europe. And I think it was like 47% of people resigned from tech jobs in the last quarter in the States, which is absolutely huge. And they reckon Q2 in Europe could be the biggest resignation, obviously, because bonuses, quarterly, this, that, end of COVID, hopefully speaking. So they reckon it could be an actual influx of people resigning from the jobs. And there seems to be more jobs than candidates at the moment for a lot of companies. So I'd like to hear your guys' views on what your thoughts are surrounding the Great Resignation, and do you think it's going to have a big effect in the Berlin or the German market, so to speak?
Okay.
So John, Fernando, Jack, what's your thoughts on that? And do you think it is going to be as bad? And do you think there is going to be a lot of people resign their jobs over the next 3 to 6 months?
No, nobody else is going first, so I'll go first for this one. I think it's a buzzword that's been created, and I think it's artificial. I don't think it's a great resignation in the same way that we had a Great Depression or other things like this. It's a great realignment, and people are going to change the way they work, change where they work, change how they work. But it's not like these people are able to just get off of the job market. They're like, most people will need a job to survive. And it's a question then of what do they want to do with their lives? What do they want to do with their work? And for me, in my organization and the way I work, I see this as a huge opportunity, because if other companies are not working the right way with their staff, if other companies are not doing the right things to keep, retain and grow talent, then that's a great chance for me to get in cheap and take some of these people off their hands. And
100%.
For me, it's a huge opportunity. I said it to you before the call started. Last year, we onboarded 23 people. Last month, we onboarded 8. And they've all come from somewhere, obviously. So I think it's a realignment and not a resignation. Resignation is just the negative aspect of it, but they all end up somewhere. So I like to see it as a realignment, and I'm hoping that aligns well with me and my organization, obviously.
Okay, great point. Thanks for that, Jack. Fernando, John, what's your thoughts on that?
So I totally agree with Jack, right? Especially when we're talking about IT industry, it's that way, because this buzzword is mixed with some other social characteristics that we saw in US and different industries as well. But when it comes to tech and IT, it's more like realization of some questions that we had in the past in terms of remote work. How does that work? How does it keep bringing value to the organizations? And we had some answers for those questions during the pandemic. Now the candidates and the engineers and all, they can realize that they can find jobs that fit to their personal the personal qualities and what they seek for their lives, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I think that it will evolve to the companies having to adapt to that kind of landscape.
So and the companies obviously don't adapt will be the biggest losers.
For sure.
Pretty much.
For sure.
You know, because you still hear some clients at the moment who are still obsessed with coming into the office, not offering flexibility, not offering remotely, and I guess they are going to be the companies that will struggle and will find it hard to retain talent, I guess, from what you and Jack have said. So what about yourself, John? What's your views on it?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a different approach to this and maybe just kind of share some facts. Is that typically across technology companies, even if you're talking about, let's say, the top-rated companies like Google that offer, extreme benefits and higher paid, greatly exceeding what other companies can offer, they still have roughly 15% turnover per year. It's common in the tech industry that we have turnover. The question now is, if we're seeing more turnover, why is that, and how do we avoid that, or is that a healthy or normal thing? So I like to kind of raise another fact, is that why are tech companies or engineers maybe paid on the higher end, for their skill sets? Why do tech companies typically have, really good reviews and they have a lot of benefits that are awarded to them? The reason is because engineers typically are producing, I'm going to give a rough number here, but it's like 10x the value of what they earn in salary. So like if an engineer is making 100,000 euros per year, they're roughly producing for the business 1 million euros per year. Now, this could depend on the team, the scope, the phase of the company, etc. But that money and that valuation is why we have roles like recruiting. It's why we can have agencies and we're going to spend a lot of money to help us bring in talent, because there's an offset to that with a lot more for the business for being able to scale and everything. But we're at a phase now where a lot of companies now want engineers. Engineering is now no longer a cost center. It's now a pivot for a lot of places to become technology companies, and they can realize that engineers can allow their business to grow globally at scale. And because of that, there's a huge demand now for technical talent, and that is resulting in also just a lot more demand for the roles and a lot more opportunities for people where maybe previously they might not have had the best opportunities or maybe the best benefits or the best pay. They can now go down the road and receive exactly what they're wanting. So I think that's resulting in some of the factors of, what we might call the Great Resignation.
Like that. That's quite an interesting fact about the 10 times the salary. And that's a very interesting point. And it's a very interesting point, in fact. So that goes to the next question, really. So obviously that, prior the pandemic and etc. And it was the thing is like people talked about culture in the workplace. So with a culture, is that enough to keep staff these days, especially with remote working, teams working in multiple locations, different countries now? Does culture still come into play? Can you still create that culture with the world of remote working? Is culture enough to keep staff now? Because when one of the clocks back, 2 years ago, culture was a big thing for a lot of people. People enjoy going to the office, seeing people. You'd have a scrum meeting, and you could play pool at the same time, do a whiteboard session. You had that interaction. Now, a lot of people probably will not join. Will people still join companies, or people leave companies now due to a toxic environment, due to culture, because of the new remote way of working? So my question is, I guess, sorry for rambling on, is culture enough to keep people now? Feel free to go first, any of you guys.
Well, I think that the companies that are going to be most successful in the beginning of this process are going to be the ones that cultivate the best cultures, right? So it's something that the market already recognizes, and the engineers are seeking for that. But that's not going to be enough for keeping the engineers in this remote setup, right? So it needs to evolve. I think that culture is more tied up to the everyday work, how you interact with your team, with your manager, and the rewards and recognition that you get from the organization, right? So and that can be kept on the remote setup, but you need to adjust and address different factors. For example, people that relocate, they seek for the working environment for their social interactions as well. So if you're in a different place and you don't know anyone, so the office space is the place that you get to make friends, right? And the organizations that still need to relocate talent, they need to be aware of that and come up with different tools to address that. So
a question is, so have you changed, obviously, the culture within HelloFresh because of the remote working now? Have you seen the change in the last 9 to 12 months in terms of how it works now?
Well, yes, we saw that, because first we need to come up with different ways to build the teams, right? So we resorted to remote events. So playing Among Us with your peers, doing some other online gaming, even wine tasting. We did that remotely.
Awesome.
Right? So it really has an effect on team building. But once we got to go back to the office for a short period of time here in Germany, then we had to go remote again. But that had a big effect on how the team synced together, because be mindful that many of our 2/3 of our team right now onboarded during the pandemic time. So it's so most people didn't see me face to face, right? Before we went to the office last year.
Yep.
So that's an immediate fact. I think that the organization will have to come up with this mix of presential and remote events to build teams.
Okay. What's your thoughts, John and Jack, on that?
Yeah, I think, for culture, I mean, maybe I'll give a personal story for me is over the last 2 years, I kind of evaluate, okay, what's important to me and put a higher focus for myself on family and being closer to my son's school. So instead of doing an hour-long commute every day, which is what I was doing previously, we moved to be closer, but that meant that I was farther away from the office.
Okay.
And this was a personal trade-off. So for me, like when we're thinking about companies and the policies and processes, if there's a company that says I need to travel for 1 hour each day to go into the center of the city, that's probably not going to be a position that I might choose. I want one that could either be hybrid, or I could make that decision with alignment with my team, or I could work fully remotely. And so I think that there's aspects towards culture, like for me, that culture might have been like, okay, what's the office environment like? Do we help out each other? And now I feel like it's expanded a lot. Like for me, I care a lot more deeply maybe than I did before the pandemic, which is about like, how do we onboard people remotely? As Fernanda mentioned, you have somebody that might be moving from, let's say, like India to Berlin. They don't know anyone here. The only person that they met is their recruiter and their hiring manager. And we've seen successful situations with that, and we've seen unsuccessful situations. And it's like you have to have that level of support, and whether that means through interactions or having events, or that what that means is also that you have, let's say, for example, onboarding. It's like you're not just going to be like, okay, welcome to the team, and then we'll talk again next week. It's like, that's daily interactions. And I think a part of what we face now is that our life revolves a lot around, scheduling, instead of maybe just kind of that ad hoc hallway conversation, which is missing. But I think for a lot of us, we've adapted and grown from that. And it's no longer just about, a kicker table in the office, but it's about how do we operate ourselves? How do we work functionally as a team? And for some people, for example, like if you're a working parent, talking about diversity and inclusion, playing games at 7 p.m. at night on a Friday might not be a good culture. That could be an exclusive culture, as other people would be joining that, and that puts you under a pressure situation to, should I join that? Should I not join that? And so I think for us, also, it's been about how do we make inclusive policies and processes in place that can make it so everyone feels welcome as well. So just as another example.
Appreciate that, John. And yourself, Jack?
I think there's a lot of things going on here in this question. You've probably all heard the phrase before, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
It's actually culture eats everything else for breakfast. It doesn't matter what else you've got going on. If you've got the right kind of culture, you can deal with a lot of issues. It can be a source of resilience, and it can be a source of power for the employees and the people who are working in your organization, and it can really help. If you've got a bad working culture, you'll bleed people. So culture by itself is not enough to keep people, but it's a huge factor in getting them and keeping them happy. If you don't pay them, if you're paying under market rates, or you're mistreating them somehow otherwise, or you're not respecting their desires on how to work, then you won't keep them just by having a nice culture. I think one of the things that's also very important with culture is values. What are the values that your organization lives by? And we did this last year. We did a values workshop with the entire organization at the time. We said, okay, what do we want our values to be? And we came up with 4: kindness, excellence, ownership, and integrity.
Nice.
Those are the 4 values. They work with everything, and I have forbidden them to be written on the walls. I will not let them be written on the walls, because if you have to write them on the wall, it means people are not using them. So we ask people to use them in their day-to-day interactions. We ask people to work using these values, and people have taken this up. People are doing it as an actual active thing, and they're like, thanking each other for support, and they're like helping each other out, and they're like saying, oh, that was really excellent. They're actually using these values on a day-to-day basis. that combined with a huge effort in terms of onboarding people, people who start in Berlin, I'll put up balloons and sprinkle confetti over their desk and do all this kind of stuff. For the remote people, I can't do that. So I have to find other ways to do it. And from a management leader point of view, it becomes much higher touch because as it was said before, normally you'd see these people in the office, you'd sit at the coffee machine, you say, hey, how's it going? Now you actually have to make the time to reach out to them on Slack or on Meet or Teams or whatever and say, hey, how's it going? How are you finding your first week? Is everything okay? Can I help you somehow? And it's for leaders, I think this period has actually become more effort because the stuff that you used to be able to do kind of in between in the office, you can't do that anymore and you have to make time for it in your schedule, which is probably a fact. So, but making the time, making them feel welcome and involving them also as people creating this culture and saying, okay, how are we developing? What are our values? How are we going to work? And giving this to the people who are doing it, I think is a super important way to make this more successful. So to involve people in decisions, to respect the fact that they have families and dogs and whatever else, and to let them live their lives. And I've got 2 kids and I leave my camera on. I'm in the office today, but when I'm at home, I don't blur my background. People see my washing, people see my kids come and go because I know that I'm in a luxury position. I actually have a separate room. Some people don't. And I've seen people actually feel bad. They don't want to come to meetings. They don't want to participate because somebody's in the background cooking or kids are there doing homework. And we have to find ways to tell people that's okay.
Okay.
As leaders, that's part of our job to lead by example and to show that.
So it's quite interesting. So it seems like all 3 of you are still very passionate that culture is enough, and it's probably the most important part still within a business to retain staff, not just other things. It's quite interesting because it seems like you're quite passionate about that, especially yourself, Jack. You seem culture seems probably the most important part of your business.
Well, you have if you have a vision for your organization, what you're trying to do, and that is backed by cultures, then you can actually try and achieve these things. So I'm in healthcare. We're in a healthcare business. I'm in that business because I'm passionate about healthcare and I want to actually do something that's meaningful from my point of view.
Yeah.
And everybody else who's here is also selected throughout the hiring process to also want to be focused on this topic and to be focused on this area and to actually want to contribute here.
Yeah.
So if you get a group of people who are aligned in what you're trying to achieve, you have a business vision, the people are aligned with that, you have the cultures and the organizational support, then it can really be a fantastic place. And we've got people spread England all the way across to Romania and then all the way down into the South of Africa. So, and I thought about now, 2/3 to 3/4 of the people have also been onboarded during the pandemic. And that's actually pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's impressive. So that goes to my next question, I guess, really. And it's a pretty obvious answer, really. Has the pandemic completely changed what employees think about work, employees and employee, I guess, because some companies have adapted, some haven't. People realise, I like to take my kid to school, or I like to go to gym before work, and I don't want to be in the office at 9 o'clock on deadline. Like, some companies have adapted really well, but I read recently that Google demanded everyone come back to the office, and there's been a massive kickoff about it. So it seems like Goldman Sachs as well, basically saying if you don't come back, you got no job, pretty much, which I think is pretty wrong. So as business owners and business leaders, has that changed? Did it change your mind? Was your work process completely changed during the pandemic? Did you think it doesn't have to be 9 to 5? It doesn't have to be these times, Has it made your ways of thinking a lot different in the way you work, and I guess the way you treat your staff as well?
Sorry, go ahead, Fernando. Go ahead.
No, I think it made us realize that that first we didn't have all the answers in terms of if we go 100% remote, what would happen, right? So I think that it made everyone realize that 100% remote has its pros, but also has its cons, And now we have a much more clear vision of especially the cons, and we are waiting for the pandemic to really end to try to try out some stuff to mitigate those cons, right? But it was also interesting to see how the different teams or different people cope with psychological stress on top of the work, and how resilient they are and again it comes to culture in the end as well.
Yep.
Because so tech companies are talent businesses, right? So they rise and fall depending on how well they can attract and keep talent. And those times were baptism by fire. So all the companies that were successful, it was because they could adapt to the situation very fast.
Okay. What about yourself, John and Jack? What's your views on that?
Yeah, I think one thing I maybe a very clear point is that I've seen a lot of our candidates that ask questions in relation to our business model and how resistant we are to COVID, basically, and are we kind of COVID resistant? And some businesses are even more positive. For example, like food delivery services have been better, during COVID, but it's a question about how will they do, post-COVID, for example. Will people still want to do food delivery? And I mean, I'm not a biologist or a scientist that will be able to determine if COVID will remain with us or if it'll, kind of not. But I think for a lot of people, this is becoming a factor. For example, like I used to work previously at a travel startup, and there was a lot of questions in relation to how will this business be able to survive when people cannot travel based on government regulations. Fortunately, the German government stepped in, put people on what's called 𝐂𝐨 and allowed people to be basically furloughed for a period of time to retain a part of their salary in order to not be laid off, as there was no business that was coming in. And I think the businesses that are doing really well right now are the ones that can be able to not only kind of weather that storm, but actually be able to thrive in this case. Or maybe their business is becoming much more seasonal. Like, for example, like, a lot of people tend to travel during summers, but now maybe with COVID restrictions that might be in place in wintertime, expect no business that are coming in. So I think people are also getting better about forecasting, revenue models and better being able to manage their business, their income streams, their run rate, et cetera, as they're trying to survive, throughout this and potentially even thrive. So yeah, I think that's just one other example that I've seen.
Just for Jack's, just controversial point, I guess. Do you think, obviously COVID's not been great at all, but do you think it's had a positive impact on businesses in terms of the way they think, and in terms of the way they treat their staff, in terms of well-being, in terms of the remote, in terms of people seeing family more? Obviously it's not been a positive effect on a lot of things, but in terms of that, has it helped?
I might answer this and then go on with my point. I think some and some, and you definitely have businesses that were, travel, hospitality were hugely impacted in basically a purely negative way.
Yes, 100%.
IT businesses, people that make software, people in healthcare, people in food delivery or other kinds of delivery have seen a huge boom out of this. So I don't think there's a one brush that you can just paint across that.
Yep.
It has made the technology sector more aware of what's possible in terms of remote working. And we've seen, like, there are very successful companies like GitLab as an example. They are purely remote. They've got a post box somewhere where they get their tax paperwork sent, but other than that, they have no actual office. And they've been doing that for a long time. But they've invested a huge amount of effort into that.
Yep.
Other organizations, on the contrary, have always kind of said, okay, we're office-based, we don't care. And now they suddenly had to care. So there was a big kind of learning curve for those organizations.
Yep.
And that didn't always go smoothly. I think in terms of what will stay with us, I think there are positive things that will stay with us. I worked before the pandemic, I worked at a different company. and I would sometimes travel 4 or 5 hours one way to a meeting with a customer for 1 or 2 hours and travel back. And that was expected and normal. And nowadays everybody's like, good Lord, like I'd never do that again.
Yeah.
Nobody expects you to anymore. And I think after the pandemic, there will be a little bit of this expectation will creep back up, but it'll be reduced to a certain amount.
Okay.
I think the other thing that we've often done as leaders is people are not focused on the outcomes. You come into the office as a team lead, as a manager, you look around, all the desks are full, people are there, so you're like ticking the box, they're all working.
Yep.
2 weeks later at the end of the sprint or when the release is due or everything else, it's like not done. You know, well, why is not been here working? And it's not outcome based. It's output based, or it's being there based. And I see it also with sales staff. You expect them to be sitting at their desk calling from 9 to 5. And if they're not doing that, you're like, they're not working. But in the end, you don't actually care if they're calling for 8 hours. You care if they're bringing in 5 contracts.
100%.
Sales or 12 new candidates or whatever it is that the metric is.
Yep.
Actually sitting down as a leader and saying, okay, these are my organizational goals. These are the team goals. This is what you need to do to pay forward to this, to pay forward to that. It's a lot more work, right?
Yep.
As opposed to just going, they're in the office, must be doing something sensible.
So true, by the way.
And
Completely agree with you on that.
It's something that we struggled with before, and it's much more apparent now because we don't see them working. And I also hear these conversations with people, oh, I haven't seen him doing anything lately. You know, is he like moonlighting somewhere else, or is she doing, you know, what's she been doing the last 2 days? Well, either ask them or worry about what the outcome is of what they're doing. If they're doing the right thing, you don't have to care what time of day, what part of the organization it is in, or whether it's delivered now or in increments. You just have to agree, what's the outcome that we expect from your work? And then, and all of us employ legally adults, but to employ people who are actually adult enough to deal with this, and to employ team leads and other leadership roles who are able to empower their staff and say, okay, I don't want to check what you're doing. I expect you to deliver the following outcomes. If you can't, then we need to talk about how we can help you to do that. So it's not about bashing them, but it's about finding out, okay, something's going on in their lives. They need to look after their kids. I homeschooled my kids for like 6 months last year.
Yeah. I feel your pain. I did as well.
I do speak German, but like I was in a German primary school years and years ago. I don't know what the grammar rules are. We like watched YouTube videos like for half the day to work out what to do with their homework. Apart from which, I had to work and do other things, and so I know this from personal experience, and I don't have expectations of my staff that their lives would be any easier. And I think that's a very good position to be in. So as a leader, to make yourself vulnerable and open to this, and to also acknowledge my life is also not always perfect, you know. I'm not always going to sign on at 9 in the morning and work until 5 and then go home. Sometimes I'll get up at 6 because my kids are up, and I'll do some work then, and then I won't do anything again till 12, and that's okay as long as it's meeting the outcome we expect. But planning those with the team, that's hard work.
Do you think more companies are moving to that outcome kind of piece of work now?
No, and I think that's sad because that's a missed opportunity. I think that there's still a lot of, you must produce this much work, you must work this many hours, you must track those hours in like 15-minute blocks. There's a lot of this going on, and I think that's actually quite sad because that is the winning part of the pivot. If we switch to outcomes and we don't care that they're at their desk, they do all the work that I expect from them. They can do that in 8 hours, and I have everything I need from them. They can take the rest of the week off. What does it matter? Like, why do I need them chained to a desk for 40 hours when they've done everything I want from them?
You know what? I'm completely in agreement with you on that. And that goes to my next question, really, because I think there'll be a few Q&A questions. So obviously, we do a lot of work within Europe and US, and so, especially in Finland and Sweden, a lot of them adopting the four day week as such. and they've seen the results: better health, better work, more productive, more weight during a 4-day week. Us here at Coltech, we've just adopted a 4-day week. Since January, we've been doing Monday to Thursday. We actually don't work Fridays anymore, and our Q1 has been the best it's ever been, because people are more awake, they're more productive, they're productive in the 4 hours. They know they've got 4 days to get what they need to be done. So, as business as leaders, do you think you can see more companies adopting a 4-day week, or, as Jack said, does it really matter if they work 5 days as long as they do their outcome? You know, what's your guys? Why have we for so long been fixated with a 5-day week? That goes out to any of you guys.
I can go first. I think it depends. So internally at Vinted, there's been a lot of discussions around this, and a lot of employees are asking for this. I mean, we're a larger company, you know, like 1,500 employees or so across multiple different regions. And I think different people at different phases of their life might value this. Let's go back to the example of like a working parent. Well, if that parent needs to pick up their child at, let's say, 3 p.m., and let's say the 40-hour work week is not reduced down to 32 hours, but instead it's like 4 10-hour days. I mean, that might mean that they have to bring home, their kid, and then they're going to be, working 4 days a week for an additional like 3 hours or something.
But to go to that, John, why do they have to still work the 48 hours though? Why are we fixated on the hours? Like Jack says, as long as the outcome's done,
I
doing
mean,
35 hours.
yeah.
Is it important? That just throwing it back at you?
No, I agree, but I think that this requires a certain level of maturity in the organization to be able to say, are we clear on what we're trying to deliver? And I think that's probably easier in a smaller company, and it becomes much more difficult as, with larger companies, is to say, are we clear about what we're asking people to do? And I think that also results in some frustrations with people, and maybe that's also a reason why people tend to resign, is like there's unclear expectations for their role or what they're trying to deliver towards. And I think that requires really good leadership to be able to make it so that that's clear, or strong product management or program management, depending upon how the organization is split up in this way. Yeah, I mean, personally for me, I think a 4-day work week would be amazing. I think 5-day work week is pretty archaic. I think it was set up from like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will know, but like the Ford era days, in production line kind of assembly stuff. Yeah, and it hasn't really changed,
Exactly.
since then. And yeah, I mean, anything, I think that's better. If a company is offering 5 days a week and another company is offering 4 days a week, I mean, clearly people would prefer a 4-day work week. And for us, at least, it's been one of the benefits, I think, that could be a huge attractor for people to join your company without necessarily having to offer more in salary or, additional benefits that might have additional cost. Yeah.
Yep. No, yeah, because we've noticed, because obviously we recruit for number companies, and a lot of people are asking that question now, like, do you offer unlimited holiday as a benefit, 4-day weeks? And more and more companies, it seems, are offering that 4-day week, and they do seem to be clearing up some good talent at the moment, because people do enjoy, a 3-day week. So interesting, a company your size, would think about that. Obviously, John, and I appreciate your views on that. What about yourself, Fernando and Jack? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think that it has to do with what Jack was saying. So how fast the organizations can learn to shift the focus from output into the outcome, right? So if they are mature enough to understand what's the value that is coming from the outcomes itself, they will feel more secure to shift into a more flexible working hour setup, right? And the ones that can do that faster would be the most successful, because they will attract the quality talent, and we'll know what to do with them, right? And and it's also a challenge for legislators, right? So we need to have law security on those work relations. And this is an aspect that the organizations need to be aware of, but also the civil society.
Okay, fair enough. And what about yourself? Obviously, you touched on it earlier, Jack, anyway, on the previous question. So what's your thoughts on that?
So We don't offer a doctor. We're 45 people. We're a startup. We're building a very complicated product.
Yep.
We don't offer carte blanche 4-day weeks, but we do offer people any kind of working hour contract that they want. If it's the right person and they want to work 30 hours, 32, 35, less than 20, there's not really much point because there's too much overhead and churn on that. So there are some roles that it works for. So customer support, onboarding managers, people who have, who are not part of the development process, but supporting roles. Some of those do also work part-time, half-time. But everybody else gets to make a choice how much they want to contribute. We give that back in terms of, the people who contribute more get a higher share package. Because we're a startup, that's part of our model, that the people who are building this now at the ground, like laying the foundations for our future, they should be entitled to some of the benefits. So we're building that with the share package, we're building that with salaries that kind of try and align with their working hours. But we are trying to focus more on what is it that they should be doing rather than how many hours they're doing. We don't actually have any hour tracking. It's, yes, they have a 40-hour contract or a 30-hour contract or a 20-hour contract. I would have no way to actually validate that. So it's more about expectation management. You're somebody who's working full time, so you're available for the rest of your team as a resource and will work with your team throughout the week, or you're available part-time and it's known then, you're on me on mornings or you're on me on Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever it is. Because we have to be able to plan this, because it's not individuals, it's teams that do this work. So they have to be able to plan it. And if you've got customer support, having nobody to work Fridays is not going to work ever, because our customers as doctors will work Fridays and some will work Saturdays and Sundays too. So we have to cover these times with people. And we do that by allowing them flexibility to say, okay, in your team, those are the 3 people that you've got for that customer support section. Let's talk about who's covering which weekend and make it fair for them in terms of their work and their compensation. But those are people who've signed on for these jobs willingly. So I think it's a matter of having this conversation with people, managing expectations, and then really trying to teach the team leads and the managers how to focus on outcomes. It's not easy. It's a big change and it's harder work.
Perfect. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much, guys. There's some really great insight there and some great answers that you got. So I really appreciate your time. Got a few questions. I think some people keen to ask us a question. So, Patrick, do you want to ask any questions? Because you said about would there be open questions at the end? Is there anything you want to ask, Patrick?
I would love to if I'm allowed to. Of
course, go for it.
So my question is, since we indicated that this is not a resignation, it's an alignment. The question for me is, will we see a rise in like shorter turnover times because of the personal attachment that is just missing now? Because before, my team was the people that were around me every day and you had personal connections, and now my team is a list of Slack messages. Like, do you think that this lack of personal connection will be something that culture has to catch up with, or is that something that we just have to accept faster turnarounds now in tech companies?
Great question.
So you'll see that if you're doing it wrong. If your turnover is going up from in the past, then you're probably doing it wrong. You're right. Like, people are not attached to a list of Slack messages. But if that's their only interaction with the company, and if that's what the company thinks of as a good culture, then maybe they need to think about that a little bit harder. Because people stay through personal attachments. They like their team, they like their leader, they like what the organization is doing, but you have to enable this. And we get people to come, like, we got everybody to come the week before the Christmas party. And that was really awesome, because that was people who for 18 months had never seen each other. And that was, so we said, we're having a Christmas party, we're doing one in person, because the virtual one, while it did work, let's be honest, cooking your own turkey with instructions, it's not the same, right? And some of those meals did turn out a bit dodgy. I'm not a great cook. So getting people to come for other things, trying to find ways to get them together and to focus on the same goals and to work together, either as their daily work or part of their team's sprints or work, or making things like making up things. Okay, we have like a week where we're going to focus on this project, so people are going to come from a bunch of different places, work together, and then go back and spread that out in amongst their own organization. So I think there's ways to do it. If you don't actively do it, it won't work. If you just think, oh, it'll be okay, and ignore it, it's not a good idea.
Thank you.
And hi, Patrick.
Hey.
And so adding to what Jack was saying, and also the organizations need to start measuring that before the churn rate, right? So if you're doing that wrong, it should first appear on your engagement metrics. So if your team likes, so if the team recommends the company to their colleagues, if the engineers recommend the leader, their manager to others, you need to understand that earlier. So you need to implement those metrics first and use them as your North Star in that case.
I'll just chime in with one final point to this, is that, and this might be very Germany specific, but in Germany, there is a probation period, typically 6 months, where it's a 2-week notice period, either for the employer, towards the employer, for the employee to resign. After that, it could be anywhere from as little as 1 month to, I've seen, as high as 6 months. It depends on company policy for resignation periods after that. And what I've seen, at least over the past few years, especially when we talk about like maybe the Great Resignation or higher turnover rates, is people tend to be taking more advantage of that probation period. They're like, all right, I'm going to give this company a trial for 5 months, and if I'm not getting that performance review feedback that I've been expecting, or if I'm not having clear expectations of my contributions here, if my role is not clearly defined, if I haven't had the opportunity to engage and work with my colleagues like how I've expected, we're seeing people that are having higher turnover rates during those first 6 months. And I think that is, it's a little bit of a factor for maybe how much competition is in the Berlin market, but it's also about factors where if you have another company that's down the road that might be paying more or have better Glassdoor.com reviews or whatever, there's a lot of kind of differentiating factors beyond just the salary that can result in people deciding to leave. And ideally, as Fernando mentioned, is you want to gauge that feedback throughout, so either through surveys, through one-on-ones, retrospectives with the teams, or a variety of other methodologies that help to ensure that not only are you bringing in good talent, but that you're trying to keep that good talent as well. So yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that. I hope that helped, Patrick. I'm just going to go to a couple of other questions. Don't mean to be rude.
No, thank you very much.
So another question from Gabriella here. How do you think the balance between monetary and non-monetary compensation has changed in importance for employees? Tough question, that.
I think there's been a big change, and what John said earlier, where he was choosing himself between a further commute or like being closer to his family and the school and stuff. There were times in the past where this, like, it wasn't even an option. You couldn't even argue about this. Like, it wasn't a choice that an employee could make.
Yep.
We think back, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, for those of us who are old enough, nobody it's remote work. What's that? Like, that wasn't even on the agenda 20 years ago. And even 5 years ago or 3 years ago, a lot of companies didn't do it. I worked at a company where even during the pandemic, people had to take their lunch between 12 and 1. And there wasn't like, you could choose to go earlier or later to get around the canteen queue. It was lunchtime is 12 to 1. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty harsh. So I think that there is a lot more flexibility in terms of what people can ask for and discuss as part of the hiring process. Okay. And companies that are open to a discussion will do better. Does that mean you have to agree to every whim of every candidate? Probably not. But being open to the discussion and saying it's not just money that we're talking about, but it's money, it's shares, it's days off, it's work times, it's work locations, it's work hours, it's like, you know, childcare support, a bunch of other things. So I think there is a difference now in the focus. Obviously, the numbers on the paycheck, they do provide a lot of value to the person and that person's family. They have to be good enough. If they're not good enough, that's a like kind of a cleanliness factor. If it's below here, you won't get the people that you need, and they won't be happy and they won't stay. After that, then it's much more individual in that top 20% of the salary, whether it's one person wants money because they're saving for a house or something else. One person wants more time because they realize that's more important. So it's very individual. And if you can adjust that in that top bracket, that's a good thing.
I have to say though, you know, because obviously we help you guys, but 99% it still seems to come to monetary to me. You know, it's just you know, amount of candidates say, oh, you know, I want 75,000 euros. It's about better lifestyle, and boom, someone comes in 82, like taking a new role. It's still, for me, it still seems very monetary, but I could be wrong.
There's a lot there, but if you can actually, if you have a good recruiting process, you're engaged with a candidate, you're talking to them, then you can find out what's actually important to them.
Of course.
You've got to be above the bar to get in. So if that person says, I will not talk about any offers that are under 80, right? If you come and say, I've got 70 and I want to talk to you, they'll be like, no, bugger off. But if you can engage in a conversation with them, you can often find out there's other things that are more important to them. And effectively, all of these things add up to money in some way, shape, or form. You just have to like find the right factoring and find the right conversation with that person. So I try to make it as individual as possible after we've done the like basic cleanliness of the salary.
Awesome. Do you want to add anything to that, John, or has that covered it? 'Cause I've got a couple more questions, so I don't know if you guys want to.
I think that covers it. Happy to go to the next question.
Yeah, okay, cool. So question from Hanif here. How do you see the effects of remote working on promotions, like in terms of visibility of achievements, detecting high performance, because you can't witness the moments of employees, I guess, anymore, in terms of receive the final product task. So how can you resolve such a question? You know, how can you, as a leader, resolve such a challenge? You guys can see the question there as well. So hopefully that made sense of what I said.
Yeah, I think that this is a really tough question. I mean, I think it's something that nobody's really probably figured it out perfectly just yet, you know, and there is companies that have offered tools for managing performance, and this places an added emphasis under these situations about one-on-ones or, you know, I hate to use this word of status reports, you know, but sometimes if you have like a very big and complex project and you have 30 people that are working on it, you can't do 30 one-on-ones each week. And so having people write up reports or, you know, at least brief blurbs about what they're accomplishing, what are the issues that they're facing, either through stand-ups or through writing it down, can be beneficial for seeing those achievements. I think that performance plans, growth plans for an individual have always been exceptionally important, and even more so now. I mean, especially where, you know, people, I think that's part of a culture. It's like people want to grow, and growing doesn't mean that, you know, I want to be promoted to a senior in the next year. I mean, it could also mean that like I want to grow my skill sets in this area, or I want to learn about this new thing, or I want to challenge myself in this new way, or I want to get better with a certain skill set that I'm lacking in. And those types of plans, there is methodologies online about, you know, how to track that and how to have those discussions with the team lead to their employees. And yeah, I think that to me that becomes kind of an expectation for those roles, to have those discussions and not just be once a year, but they should be regularly. Yeah.
Appreciate that, John. Cheers. Do you have any thoughts on that, Fernando or Jack, or shall I go to the next question?
Yeah, maybe we should take the last question there, and because already.
I know you're all against time. So this is quite a good question, actually. What is your top recommendation for companies as a priority to retain their staff right now?
Listen to them, talk to them, listen to them. Like actually, like don't talk at them, but talk with them, listen to them, get their feedback, work out what's happening. And the development plans, that's like nobody works in a vacuum. We don't have like isolated employees who just work alone in the cellar and like do something and like push results up. They all work in a team. So 360-degree feedback, getting the information from the rest of the team leads. But number one thing you can do, make the time. It does cost a lot of time, but listen to them. Make yourself available for the members in the organization. Even if you're 1 or 2 levels further up, find ways to make yourself available. I do a weekly AMA session, for example, where like I sit around Friday afternoon, have a coffee or a beer, depending on how I feel that Friday, and people can come and ask. And the only rule for that session is if you turn up, you have to ask something. You can't just come and hang around. And there's always something to talk about organizationally, or what's happening in sports or the rest of the world, how we're dealing with various situations that are going on in other parts of the world, especially with remote workers. So we always find something to talk to, but making time, being available, actually listening to them, and then turning that into something. If 10 people out of your organization of 40 all say this is important, find a way to like actually make that important.
Thank you for that. What about yourself, Fernanda? What would be your top tip?
So, well, I guess Jack
sorry
already...
sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. So yeah, I think that Jack already said, so focus on people, listen to them, and optimize your organization to respond to those changes, so the organizations need to learn fast and change their policies accordingly. Only if you can manage to do that in a very agile way is that you're going to succeed in this competition right now.
Really appreciate that. And yourself, John?
I think Jack and Fernando covered it excellently, so nothing further.
Perfect. So one question for me, and this is it, then I'll let you get a bite to eat. We've seen a huge demand for freelancers across Europe for a number of reasons. People resigning, can't get staff quick enough. I think the freelance market in Germany alone has grown 60% in the last 6 months. Do you think you guys will adopt using freelancers, or do you think the freelance market keep growing and growing and growing because there's such a demand and projects are falling behind because some CEOs are obsessed with hiring perm people? They want 12 where you can get some contractors in and deliver projects quicker. Do you think there'll be a demand for freelancers a lot more this year due to people resigning and lack of talent? Well, if anyone's got a view on that.
It depends on the organization. So we're adoptively building a complicated product that's going to like be around for a long time. Freelancers, we have used them and we do use them to fill a gap. My favorite trick is turning freelancers into permanent employees. So I've very successfully done that with one gentleman just this week. So I'm quite impressed with that. But for us, because of the domain knowledge that's required around healthcare, around our product, its complexity, if you have smaller projects, I think you can get away with something like this. And you can say, okay, this project, it's going to be 3 months. We're just going to staff it with like one permanent guy or girl and like a bunch of freelancers and just whoop it over the line.
Yep.
And you can have completely different expectations for how these people will work.
Yep.
Because the expectation of freelancers, they will basically just work brutally. They don't need that much love and watering. You're not in it for the long run. You're not worried about their professional growth. You're worried about them delivering a certain something.
Yep.
If you do that too much, your organizational culture suffers.
Yep.
It depends on the projects, it depends on the timeframes, and it depends on what you're building and what you're willing to do to your culture to get a result.
Okay, brilliant.
So short answer, yes, I think that you will grow, but just under the restrictions that Jack just said. So it depends on the project, depends on the team, and all that.
So all project based, isn't it? So if a bit of, if you got a project that needs to be delivered in 3 months, you could probably get a team of freelancers in to deliver that. Then obviously your permies keep building the legacy and keep all the knowledge. I guess that's pretty much what you guys are saying. What about yourself, John? Do you think there'll be a growth for them?
Yeah, same answers as Fernando and Jack mentioned.
Yeah, perfect. All right then, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone joining. And oh, sorry. Thank you. Could I ask last? Oh no, ignore that. Rick said he could ask another 10 questions. Well, Patrick, feel free to connect to John, Fernando, and Jack on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll feel more than happy to answer any questions. Hope you don't mind me saying that, guys. Haven't asked them, but I'm sure they'll be fine.
Anybody who wants to can definitely reach out, and we can see if we can make time for a chat.
Perfect. Well, really appreciate your time, guys. Have a great week, and we'll speak soon. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.